World building can feel overwhelming, especially if you're diving into it for the very first time. With countless elements to juggle, it's easy to get lost in the details. But what if I told you that there was a game-changing trick to simplify the process? A tool that could help you enrich your worlds or help you fill in an existing one. And it all starts with this, a miniature. And no, you don't need a 3D printer or even use miniatures at your table to take advantage of this world building strategy. My name is Tom Tobar, and welcome to Behind the Screen, a Game Master's Guide. This is a show where I take you behind my Game Master screen, and I share some of my favorite tips, tricks, tools, and toys that I'm using to become a better Game Master. And today's topic is miniatures and world building. World building from a blank page can feel overwhelming to say the least. When world building, you have to consider factors like geography, history, culture, politics, economics, magic, technology, flora, fauna, religion, beliefs, conflict, character, and social structures. That's a lot to come up with all on your own. So how will miniatures help us fill in some of these areas when we're world building, even if we don't use miniatures at our table? Well, that's a fantastic question. First, let's talk about the creative process just in a general sense. Many world builders turn to different kinds of art to help inspire them to create their own endeavors. Some common examples of this would be listening to music or finding a piece of art to help us visualize the world that we're trying to create. The point is to allow yourself to be influenced and moved to see the world from this different perspective, and then to write from this different perspective. In the end, many miniature creators do this exact same process, and then they make artistic choices that reflect these unique visions. As a game master, I can use these artistic world-building decisions made by the miniature creators as a jumping-off point for my own world building. Now, if you've only looked at miniatures from a player's perspective, then you might not understand what I mean. The reason is that players are often concerned with only finding or creating single miniatures for the characters that they want to play at the table. Most of these single miniatures are very plain and have a very simple design, for the most part. They're meant to fit into multiple environments and backgrounds, so they stray away from overly distinguishing characteristics like cultural elements or environmental features. Some online miniature creators, on the other hand, create themed or environmental packs. These miniatures are loaded with details that can help us a great deal when we're doing our own world building. Let's take a look at some of these themed packs to get a better understanding of what I mean. Recently, I tried out a miniature creator I had not used before called Heroes Infinite. They're available on Patreon, link in the description. They had a miniature set called Night of the Cursed Vows, the Vampire Groom, and the Ghostly Bride. First, let's see some of the miniatures in this whole set. The story the miniature creator wants to tell us about is about a ghostly bride going off to marry a vampire for some unknown reason. The creator of this set also generously gives some suggestions on what this story could be, but we're obviously not tied to this specific explanation. We could choose to look at some of these miniatures and come up with our very own story, which is what we're going to do. In order to do this, all we need to do is take a closer look at the details inside the miniature's design. Then we can work backwards from this in creating our own world building and crafting a unique setting and story. This miniature is labeled as Lady Ilaria, the Screaming Bridesmaid. First, isn't this miniature amazing? So many rich details that make world building so much easier. Step 1. Environmental indicators. The first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to look at the items inside the miniature that tells us something about the environment. So, in this case, the dress, while very spectacular, has very short sleeves. This tells me that we can be in any kind of an environment that's most likely not too cold or not too hot. Other than that, there's not a whole lot as far as the environmental distinguishing features in this. Step 2. What distinguishing features does this miniature have? The first thing that comes to my mind is the gold jewelry and the big gold circle around her head. This tells me that she's a person of great wealth. Is the person paying for this wedding a rich ruler or possibly royalty? Secondly, I see that the swans and her body are both hit by multiple arrows. This tells me something about the way that this person died. Was it an accident or was it a plan? Well, there's a lot of arrows all targeted around their hearts to be accidental, so I could probably rule that out. Then there's this also magically imbued rose bush that seems to be attracted to or controlled by the bridesmaid. Finally, there's a wedding bouquet. It almost looks like the sword is not as important as the flowers that she's wielding at somebody. Step 3. Putting it all together. With all this information in mind, let's world build just for a moment. With all the gold involved, I'm going to say that the groom had a vast fortune and was spending a lot of money on this wedding. With all the arrows in both the bridesmaid and the animals, this tells me that a group of people killed the wedding party in more of a mob environment instead of an assassination attempt. Putting these two ideas together, I'm going to say that the townsfolk was the mob that killed the bridal party, but why would they do this? The motive could be that the people of the land, the villagers, have been mistreated by the groom, the ruler of this land, and they were starving. The people were very angry that all this money was used for something as trivial as a wedding instead of taking care of them. Kind of a Marie Antoinette let them eat cake French Revolution kind of a situation. So why would the bridal party be cursed to live as undead? Well, maybe the bridal party was trying to do the right thing by the people and help them. But instead of killing the groom, the bad person in this, the townspeople got a hold of the bridal party instead and killed them. Now the bridal party is out looking for revenge. The way that the maid of honor is brandishing the flowers around looks more like she's accusing someone of betrayal. Possibly she's looking for the people that she thinks are responsible for her and her friends' early and gruesome demise. She points flowers at the living that she deems responsible for laying this curse on them, and so she lays a curse on them instead. All undead are drawn to the living who bear the curse of the bridesmaid. It even looks like the land itself is cursed, and the roses are on the bridal party's side. Knowing all this, let's talk about the environment. It sounds fun to say that there's an abandoned town somewhere that is filled with the decay of death. The only thing that seems to grow are the bright blood-red roses that attack all the living people dumb enough to get close. Finally, let's talk about plot. The town is filled with the undead looking for the ungrateful townspeople who killed the bride and her friend. Each night, they hold a ghostly wedding, looking for more members to join the undead celebration. What will cause the bride and her party to finally be at peace? And where is this groom who started this entire mess? As you can see, this method of world building can be done by just looking at a few of the miniatures in this set. I personally like the story that I created, and will most likely use the vampires in this set in some other story. When looking at miniatures for world building, I'm specifically looking for visual inspiration, mood, atmosphere, character design, and a strong consistency between the models. If I'm running a game that is theater of the mind, I can use photos from these sets to help paint a specific picture for my players. I can even share photos at my table to show them exactly what it is that they're facing. If you own a 3D printer, on the other hand, using real miniatures at your table that perfectly match the story that you're trying to tell is an experience that is just truly amazing for both the game master and for the players at your table. If you're interested in learning more about 3D printing, check out this video to get yourself started. There are a lot of really amazing themed miniature sets available online. My two favorite right now are Heroes Infinite and Artisan Games. I really suggest that you check both of these guys out. Both of the links are in the description. Now that we've talked about themed miniature set packs, I'm going to talk about something that's a little bit more subtle in world building, what I would call environmental miniature sets. My favorite environmental pack creator is Artisan Guild on Patreon. This creator is my favorite for the following reasons. Number 1, the miniature style and art is truly amazing. 2, the supports for printing are almost always flawless. The miniatures are robust enough to survive at the table play. That's a really big one. But most of all, I love the number of miniatures that all share a similar theme. This is really, really important because when I do my world building, the more that the miniatures share that same theme, the easier it is for me to run a game in that environment and the easier it is to world build. Not to mention organization of my miniatures after it's time to put them away. Super, super helpful. Let's go ahead and look at one of these miniature provider packs from Artisan Guild from the November release, Barkwraith Spriggan. In the November release of Artisan Guild, we have a tree species called Spriggans. Some of these Spriggans are small human-sized creatures and other ones are a little bit larger. We also have a few of these half-elf Spriggans, which are kind of interesting. The Artisan Guild explanation for these half creatures is that they're illusions, meant for trespassers to stumble upon and be led into dangerous and horrible traps. There's also 3 unique miniatures and 1 epic boss. I'm going to do the exact same exercise I did before with Heroes Infinite miniatures in world building to see where this gets me with this pack. Step 1. What items in the miniatures tell me something about the environment? The one thing that's very obvious, we're talking about tree people. There's only really 2 options that I can think of. Either they're in a forest of some kind, or they're in an invasive species that was taking over some non-forest environment. Nature taking over or reclaiming a city, for example. Step 2. What distinguishing features does the miniature have? For the most part, all the miniatures have the same overall consistent features. There's only 2 features that are a bit odd. First, the elf Spriggan hybrids, and the other are the fairies that are carefully hidden around in certain areas, especially with the boss. With all this in mind, let's go ahead and world build just for a moment. In my mind, the real enemy are not the elves or the Spriggans. Instead, wouldn't it be fun if the real enemy was the small fairies? If I were to place all these miniatures in my world, I would probably tell the following story. Number 1. There once was a settlement of elves who lived in peace with the woods that were around them. Number 2. The Spriggans and the elves lived in peace, prosperity, and harmony. Number 3. Before long, a group of mischievous fairies began to sow distrust between these 2 groups. The elves, they want to take your land and cut down your forest, the fairies would whisper to the Spriggans. Number 4. So much distrust and anger was built up over time that when the elves decided to build their buildings next to the forest that they loved so much, the Spriggans attacked. Number 5. The Spriggans were not satisfied with simply destroying their enemy. Instead, they began to take over them like a parasitic host. Number 6. Now the fairies can control the Spriggans fully. You see, the only thing keeping the Spriggans free, healthy, and happy were the elves. They were keeping the fairies under control. If you were a player in this story, what would you think of it? What would you do? I hope this video has helped you in your world building process. The truth is there's many different amazing miniature providers out there, all with rich and amazing stories to tell. What miniature provider do you find to be the most helpful when you're doing your world building? Let us know in the comments below what your favorite creator is and why. Until our next encounter, I'm Tom Tobar, and I'll see you next time behind the screen.